moving out of restrictions, the world is going back to normal, and we can all finally enjoy the peace and serenity of 21st century. Let's see what's good on the news today. Hello and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hi, I'm Dr. Gibberish, and you can become my friend today by subscribing to the channel so we can overthrow Putin together. Just not literally, cause I'm a little sissy and I don't want to die. 2 days ago the world was shaken as Putin realized his pee-pee might seem a little smaller than his predecessors, so he invaded Ukraine in a desperate attempt to prove everyone otherwise.
Gunfire and explosions have been heard here and in the second city of Kharkiv shortly after the Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine.
Overnight, the 30-plus population of Facebook has switched from a board of medical professionals into council of military generals, yelling at Biden, Johnson and bunch of other NATO leaders to send military in, oblivious to the way the world around them actually works and what NATO can and cannot do. But hey, that's just the way things are on the internet. The less you know about something, the more you talk about it. But we're here today to change that, at least for these 200 something people watching my channel, as I'll tell you what is happening in Ukraine and why. Why has Russia invaded them? Why isn't NATO getting directly involved, and what they can and cannot do and why? I'm a little late to the hype train of the crisis, but I had to make sure I'm not speaking out of my ass about those things like most people on the internet do. So for the past 3 days I've been refreshing my knowledge of Ukrainian and Russian history, watching news and getting traumatized by war footage of charred corpses on the side of the freeway. Thank you, Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, I didn't need sleep anyway. You may be thinking the war between Russia and Ukraine started 2 days ago, but in fact the problem is how things have always worked in Russia. Every time the current Russian dictator is getting desperate to prove their schlong is the longest, they do what everyone does. They pick a small country to go to war with various results. Sometimes they end up getting their asses kicked, like back in 1904 when they tried starting a war with Japan. Sometimes they're kind of successful, like back in 1939 when they striked a collab deal of a century with Hitler to invade Poland from both sides, which backfired a few years later when they got butt-plugged all the way back to Stalingrad by their favorite collaborator. And sometimes very successful, like when they liberated Poland and a bunch of other Eastern European countries from Hitler's grip, just to occupy them with a grip of their own for another 40 years. Basically, every time public support for the current Russian dictator is waning, they go straight to the fault-proof solution of unleashing doom on some unsuspecting small country. And Putin, as Russia's latest dictator, is no different in this matter. As he's getting older and older, his psychotic craving for a legacy to leave behind is growing bigger and bigger. Full-scale invasion of Ukraine that shook the world is merely a tip of his iceberg, or a tip of something else, if you will. As he had his cock set on Ukraine's beehole for a while now, starting back in 2014 when he lobbied and, as many suggest, rigged a referendum in Crimea, southern state of Ukraine, resulting in peaceful annexation of that part of Ukraine. Back then it might have seemed a little random, but if you look at the maps showing how the current invasion went, you can see clearly that it was all part of a plan. Crimea was a vital part of the assault, as it allowed Russia to clamp on Ukraine's testicles like a vice from 3 sides. Putin obviously has a whole lineup of excuses for invading Ukraine, ranging from press history lesson about how Ukraine has always been part of Russia.
Еще раз подчеркну, что Украина для нас это не просто соседняя страна. Это неотъемлемая часть нашей собственной истории.
To calling Ukrainian leaders bunch of junkies and neo-Nazis.
Власть в свои руки. Похоже, нам с вами будет легче договориться. чем с этой шайкой наркоманов и неонацистов.
Which is kind of ironic if you ask me, as what he's doing is exactly what Hitler did to Czechoslovakia back in 1938, where he invaded the Sudetenland to reunite local German folk with their homeland. But right after that, he shifted his narration to whole of Czechoslovakia, and that might sound eerily familiar, as Putin's initial excuse for invasion was to capture the Donetsk region, which was meant to reunite local Russian folk with their homeland. But since Putin pivoted towards narration about whole of Ukraine belonging to Russia, a little bit of deja vu if you ask me, and it's really cynical of Russia to call Ukraine the Nazis. It's almost like some backwards virtue signaling to shift the Nazi narration away from themselves. Since start of the invasion, shells, rockets and ballistic missiles have been falling all across Ukrainian country, as you can see on this map compiled on Twitter, where red area is the area currently occupied by Russians and yellow markers is where explosions were reported. Putin is trying to push narration of targeting only military targets, but he once again underestimated power of the internet, as videos, photos and press reports pouring in from the region provide clear evidence that missiles, bombs and rockets have been hitting civilian targets. Most important miscalculation he made during the invasion, however, is that in his delusion he somehow seemed to hope for Ukrainian people to just lay down their weapons and welcome Russians with open arms as liberators. Boy oh boy, he missed a mark on this one. Spirit of Ukrainian nation is clearly showing and is strongly disproving Putin's claims about Ukraine being a made-up nation, as everyday citizens of Ukraine are joining the combat. Thousands of automatic rifles are being handed out to anyone willing to fight, and I have to admit, even though I'm fat and good for nothing in military, some wild part of me really just wants to drop everything, go there, grab a rifle and help Ukraine defend the country. Obviously, that's a bit of a pipe dream to say the least, as in my current shape, all I'd be good for would be target practice for Russians, but hey, it really shows how inspirational and impressive the Ukrainian national spirit is. But spirit alone won't protect Ukraine against Russian shells, and many people online seem to be rightfully angered at NATO for their lack of direct combat response, oblivious to how things actually work. So let me get you up to speed on this one. It's not as simple as sending NATO military to defend Ukraine. As much as I hate it, we need to acknowledge that NATO's main goal and purpose is to defend and protect members of NATO. Ukraine, for many reasons, has not managed to secure either NATO or EU membership, meaning they are technically and formally still independent from both of these. But what does that mean? Well, in layman's terms, if Ukraine was a part of either EU or NATO, then NATO's military response would be an act of defense provoked by Russia. But since Ukraine is not a part of NATO or EU, open military response from NATO would classify as an act of aggression on Russia, an unprovoked act of aggression, as technically Russia hasn't attacked any member of NATO or EU. What NATO and the EU can do, however, and what they've been doing so far, is humanitarian aid, lethal aid, and sanctions on Russia. Humanitarian aid includes sending food, medical and hygienic supplies. Lethal aid, military equipment, weapons, tank, ammunition, all the goodies allowed Ukraine to continue their fight. Thousands of trains and trucks full of weapons and supplies are being sent to Ukraine from all over the world, but it is unknown how long will it be until Putin clamps down on these as well. And the hottest topic of all, which is obviously sanctions put on Russia by NATO and EU. Don't let any Council Estate dweller fool you. Sanctions are as effective as weapons, as they're aimed directly at Russia's economy and trade. To everyday Joe, it might seem like nobody is doing anything and that sanctions are just some bullshit made up as an excuse, but you need to remember that everyone involved is walking a very thin rope. Russia is largely independent from Europe. They have a butt ton of resources of their own, whilst Europe is very much dependent on Russia's energy. So you can clearly see where the fear of retaliation comes from. All NATO and EU can do are non-violent ways of helping Ukraine and hoping Putin won't go into berserk mode with his ambitions to restore Russia to its former glory. For now, unfortunately, I don't think any kind of NATO military response is on the table, as it's pretty clear that the cold, cruel math says the price of Ukrainian sovereignty is a potential escalation to a worldwide crisis. One thing is certain, however, that Putin severely underestimated Ukrainian people's will to fight for their own country. And it seems pretty clear at this point that even if the invasion succeeds and turns into a full occupation of the country, Ukrainian people will keep fighting the oppressor from the underground, much like French resistance did with the Nazis during occupation of France. I'll keep my eye on the polls, and to all my Ukrainian viewers, if there are any, I wish you best of luck defending your country. Slava Ukraine. But what do you think about the situation? Please let me know in the comments. I always read and reply to every single one of them. And before you go, don't forget to rate this video. If you liked it, like it. If you didn't like it, dislike it. And consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell so you can stay up to speed with my channel and receive notifications when I upload new videos. That would be all from me today. I'll see you next week. Stay safe. Bye bye.